Welcome to this DIIS seminar, Caught in Gasline Geopolitics. This is a seminar that we're doing with the support of the Defense and Security Studies at DIIS, which is financed by the Danish Ministry of Defense. And the reason that we're all here today is because we're witnessing a world where gas supply is increasingly becoming a crucial factor in both great power politics and day-to-day politics of the world today. And that is especially true of the Baltic Sea region. Now, before I will hand over the word to our three panelists, I will start out myself by just trying to sketch a little bit what has happened in Baltic Sea region security in general, and with regards to gas politics in particular within the last few years, to sort of give a background and try to set the board for the discussions that we are going to have here today. So I'll just put on my PowerPoint. Just why is it not? Why on earth? Let's see. And there it is. Sorry, I just want to find it there. And there. Okay. So let's take the Baltic Sea region. First, let's start with security politics. Now, prior to 2014, it was seldom that people would talk about the Baltic Sea region in geopolitical terms. That all changed with the outset of the Ukraine crisis, causing relations between Russia and the West to sour. Now, among NATO allies, concerns for Russian behavior in the region was especially high in the Baltic countries and Poland, for both geographical as well as for historical reasons. And NATO has responded to this increase in tensions, not least with the forward presence, the enhanced forward presence, that is the stationing of 4 multinational battle groups in each of the Baltic countries and Poland, providing important additional troops for the defense of those countries, but perhaps even more importantly, providing a tripwire effect, ensuring that a Russian attack on those countries would inevitably drag NATO in its entirety. And if we move down the ladder of escalation, we've also seen Russian hybrid actions in the domains of cyber and domains of strategic communication, attempting to destabilize not just the countries of the Baltic Sea region, but rather EU and NATO countries more broadly. Now, today I'm not going to go deep into these challenges. Today is, after all, going to be about gas politics, but this is sort of the general worsening of tensions, of the rising of tensions, the worsening of the security dynamics in the Baltic Sea region that sort of forms the backdrop against what we talk. Now, if we zoom in on gas politics, then today I'm just going to briefly sketch some of the great power politics surrounding 2 gas lines, Nord Stream 2, a primarily Russian-driven project, and Baltic Pipe, which is a Polish-Danish enterprise primarily. Now let's try to start with Nord Stream. If we take a look at the Nord Stream route, we can see it here. And Nord Stream 2, it's quite a significant pipe. It's set to be able to deliver 55 billion cubic meters of gas per year. And as we shall hear a little bit more of later, the Nord Stream 2 crisis or the debates, they go back quite far in time. So it's been with us for a while, for at least 5, 6 years, 7 years. And as I mentioned earlier, the general souring of geopolitics in the region is sort of the backdrop. But when you take a look at Nord Stream 2, we actually find that looking at political alliances and the interests of the relevant powers of the region, what shall we say, alliance lines in security politics and gas politics doesn't always merge completely. So I'm just going to briefly run you through the main state actors involved in Nord Stream 2. So first of all, we have Russia, who is driven by key economic and strategic concerns in seeing the pipeline finished. Then we have a group of Eastern European countries, especially Ukraine, but also Poland and the Baltic countries, who are set against Nord Stream 2 for economic and political reasons. Then we have Germany and several other European countries interested in stable and affordable gas deliveries from Russia, as well as representing, as well as seeing as a way of, or they fear that it will, that they see it as a way of increasing interdependence with Russia. So actually, in security terms, they see it as a good thing. The rationale here is if Germany buys gas from Russia, well, that's a dependency for both the buyer and the seller. So that, in this line of thinking, could be seen as something that increases stability. Then we have number 4, the US, who's interested in denying Russia any leverage over both Eastern Europe and Germany, while also looking to expand its own LNG, and that's liquid gas exports, to Europe. And then finally, we have a country like Denmark, who has no major stakes in the gas line, but who has to deal with pressure from the other 4 groups. And you can see here that if I'm just sort of zooming in on the interesting point, it is, of course, that we find this weird position, especially between Germany and Russia and the US, where in security terms we have the US and Germany, what should we say, on the same side, whereas when we take a look at Nord Stream 2, we can see the Germans are actually quite interested in seeing are very interested in seeing the pipeline finished. Okay, so let's try to shift to Baltic Pipe and see what's going on at the political level there. So we see the route here. Baltic Pipe, it connects Poland and Norway. It connects Poland with gas fields in Norway, and it runs through Denmark. Some of it at sea and some of it over land. And if we just try to run through it again, we see the key states. Obviously, Poland is driven by their desire to be independent of Russian gas, and also by pressure from the EU to adopt greener energy sources. And of course, gas is not CO2 neutral or anything like that, but it's nevertheless regarded as a greener energy source. Then we have Norway, interested in selling gas and also in promoting a greener transition. Then we have Russia, who is set against Baltic Pipe, because Baltic Pipe will mean less Russian gas to Poland. But here it's important to when we sort of consider Baltic Pipe and Nord Stream 2 on a political level and compare them, it's important to realize that Baltic Pipe is a much smaller project than Nord Stream 2. When Baltic Pipe is finished, we're talking about a capacity of roughly 10 billion cubic meters per year, whereas if you can remember that Nord Stream 2, that we're talking 55 billion cubic meters per year. So it's less than a fifth in capacity of Nord Stream 2, and that also sort of affects the level of importance attributed to the project. It's not quite as high politics as Nord Stream 2. Then we have the US, who are positive toward Baltic Pipe for the exact same reasons that the Russians are negative, because it will make Poland less dependent on Russian gas. And again, this it is less important than Nord Stream 2, but it's still something that makes the radar in the US nevertheless. Then we have Denmark, of course, where it's a bit more complicated. There are economic interests, transit fees, the prospects of lower gas prices for Danish consumers. But then, of course, it's also about positioning Denmark in the political game on the side of the US and Poland. And it's about actually, and this may strike you as a bit curious, it also actually ended up being about Denmark's exclusive economic zone. And exclusive economic zone is this area of water where it's not territorial waters, but it's a bit further out, where a state can have, yes, as the name entails, certain economic rights to the water and to the seabed. And as we shall hear a little bit later, I think in Trine's presentation, Denmark's exclusive economic zone and so border drawing, if you will, was actually also affected by the political discussions surrounding Baltic Pipe. And then finally, of course, the cost for Denmark is besides financing the project together with Poland, it also comes down to the construction of new infrastructure with pipes and all those problems that those entail for the people living next to where the pipes are going to go. So I just wanted to mention that because that's obviously goes in the drawback pile. And then we have finally the rest of the EU, where it's a lot about pushing Poland on green transition, and the EU is, if we sort of compare to Nord Stream 2, it's interesting to note that the EU is less divided on Baltic Pipe than on Nord Stream. But again, Baltic Pipe is also a smaller project compared to Nord Stream. Good. This was just my sort of attempt to broadly sketch the two projects. And now we will shift gear a little bit, and we will go to our three panelists, and I'll introduce them each in just prior to their presentation. So I'll just stop sharing here, and then. I want to introduce Martin Næsby, who is Managing Director of Oil and Gas Denmark. We're very happy to have him here today. And as I said, his presentation is going to be a little bit different from what I sketched here. It's going to be more on the value of security of supply in a more global perspective. But then we will return to the more specific thematics regarding the gas pipes in the two final presentations. So fear not for that. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over the word to you, Niels. Please. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Martin. Sorry. I'm going to hand over the word to you, Martin. Sorry about that.
That's right. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to this very interesting, very relevant panel discussion. I'll try to see if I can have technology working for me. Share the screen. Can you see it?
We can see the notes as well. Can you change it to full screen without the notes?
Let me see. I don't have any notes, but
No.
I think it's the next slide, so to speak, that you can see, and that is of course the notes.
Yeah, maybe Auslut slideshow again and then try again.
We just practiced, right? And there it worked. Can you see it now?
No.
Nope.
Yeah, there's something. Yeah, now we can see it.
And it's and you can't see the note anything.
Yes, it's perfect now.
Excellent. All right. So let me see if this works. Interesting. All right. So just a few words about who we are as an organization. We We are the upstream oil and gas organization in Denmark, which means that we are representing the producers in the Danish sector of the North Sea and all of the oil companies out there producing, as well as the suppliers of services and goods. And therefore, for this reason, we are not directly involved in neither the Baltic Pipe nor the Nord Stream. But of course, it's therefore I will be giving, as also mentioned by Mikkel, a slightly different perspective, where I'll be firstly zooming out and looking at what are some of the global challenges, and then zoom in on Denmark and a few words on the green transition. So that's where I'll be coming from. So if we start out by looking at Denmark, then in light of the oil crisis in '73, Denmark was determined to establish its own oil and gas production, and we did that back in '73 when production started out. And a few years after, we were self-sufficient, which means a net exporter of oil and gas. And we have been that for many years, for around 30 years. And that's, of course, a very good position to be in, because we are independent of production of oil and gas globally. But as also touched upon by Mikkel, the international order is under pressure. So what does that mean for us? And if we stop production, if we do not have the oil and gas in the North Sea, what would that mean? And we all know about the energy agreement that was entered into in December last year, where production in the Danish sector of North Sea will stop in 2050. So how will all of that impact the North Sea? But if we look at the world and Europe, you can see here that the demand, and I think it's very important to keep focused on the demand side, because it's always very nice to look at the supply side. But what is the demand in Europe? And if you look at Europe, you can see that in 2040, and those are the numbers from the International Energy Agency, the World Energy Outlook, the latest review. And here you can see that it's expected that renewables will take a huge role in Europe, less degree in the world. But it's also obvious that use of natural gas, which is the blue, will be continuing not only in Europe, but certainly in the world. So, and all these figures are based on the Sustainable Development Scenario, which is a Paris-compatible scenario established by the International Energy Agency. So natural gas will secure more than 20% of the demand for energy, and this demand is actually increasing. And if you look at these slides, then interestingly enough, if you look at the bottom on the x-axis, I'll not go through all the figures, but if you look at the bottom and find Europe, can you find that at the bottom at the x-axis as the lower figure? And here you can see the local conventional production of natural gas. And on top of that, you see the pipeline imports, i.e. that will be, for example, the Nord Stream pipelines. And on top of that, you see the liquefied natural gas. And for those of you who are not certain about what LNG, or liquefied natural gas is, then it's a gas that is being cooled down to minus 160 degrees, and then it becomes fluid. You can put it on a ship, and then you can sell it to the market, or transport the gas to the market, heat it up, and put it into the pipeline. And that is always a problem with energy, that you need to produce it, but you certainly also need to transport it from the producer to the people who need the energy. And here, the hydrocarbons obviously has a huge advantage. But it's interestingly enough that you can see that the domestic production, the indigenous production is going down, whereas import is going up. And that, of course, puts Europe in a crossroad. And that LNG will be coming from, in particular, the US, and the pipeline gas will be coming from Russia. But if you take a global look here, and there's a lot of numbers here, and I try to make the slightly complicated world map simple for you. And it's about production index. So if you look at Europe, you can see there's a number on the oil, which is 23%, and gas is 45%. What it means is that out of the total demand for gas, then Europe is producing 23% of the, for the oil, 23% of the oil, and 45% of the gas. If you look at China and the Asia Pacific, you can see the same number for the oil, 23%, and 79% for the gas. And here, China is in the situation that they're in dire need of a lot of energy. Where is it coming from? If you take a closer look at the CIS, you can see that a lot of oil is being produced here, as well as a lot of gas. And you can also see that the Middle East is producing a lot of oil and gas as well. So bottom line is that Europe is a fierce competition with China and the Asia Pacific about natural resources. The US is showing 83% on the oil and 101% for gas. I think they're closing in on 100%. So they are self-sufficient, and that's a position that they have brought themselves in particular via production of shale oil and shale gas, as you're probably aware. But bottom line is here that we need the energy resources in Europe, and so does China. The role of China is in the merging China and the industry in China, also following the Corona crisis, is that the demand is going up. And the point of this slide is to show that we are always thinking of the Hormuz Strait down in the Middle East as the major choking point. And what we mean here is that if there's a crisis in the Middle East, and if a war breaks out with Iran, for example, then always we are sitting back and fearing that the Hormuz Strait will be closed down and there will be no export of oil from that. But as you can see here, as and when China is rising, then the Malacca Strait will, to a further extent, be a choking point. Russia is exporting a lot of gas to China, and that in itself makes Russia less reliant on the European market. We also expect that China will become more active in the Middle East. And all in all, it does mean that this competition that we saw in the previous map is getting worse, so to speak. So therefore, in our perspective, the main point is that we in Europe, we should make sure that we have security of supply and that we keep producing the oil and gas that we have in the subsoil in Europe. So if we from there jump to the Danish sector, we've already seen the Baltic Pipe and the Nord Stream 2. The apologies for the map on the right side. I think that is slightly outdated. The position of the pipeline has been determined. But as you can see here, we have the Danish sector in the middle, where the vast majority of the oil produced in the Danish sector goes via pipeline to Fredericia, and the majority of the gas produced goes from the Tyra field, which is currently closed down, as you may know, for being renovated. And that gas goes to Nybro and then into the national gas grid. So, but how does that play into the need for reduction of emissions? And I think this perspective is extremely important. And if we have again turned back to the by the International Energy Agency and the World Energy Outlook, then the point is that in their perspective, that it's not enough to build a lot of windmills. We need to make sure that we are energy efficient. We need to extend or expand the use of renewables, but we also need to make sure that we are switching fuels. That means that we go from coal to gas, for example. But we also need the CCUS, which is the terminology for collecting the CO2 and re-injecting it to the subsoil. So what we can learn from this slide is that in the energy production scenario, we see renewables being built out, but we certainly also see that we as an industry need to be much more efficient in use of the energy, and as a society, we need to drive more on the liter of gasoline, so to speak. But certainly the 8% on fuel switching is very much about the energy transition, and as also pointed out in Mikkel's slide, then the future for the use of energy, we see gas as maybe not as a perfect green fuel, but certainly a fuel that is greener than coal, for example. Coal is emitting 40% more CO2 than gas, and really it is a huge problem. So I'm sure that I'm looking very much looking forward to Izabela's presentation. I'm sure you'll be talking about the use of gas in a national context in Poland. In Denmark, we are working very closely also as an industry together with the government to make sure that we are collaborating internationally, that we are making sure we are more energy efficient, electrification of the platforms in the North Sea, use of CCS, power to X, etc., are areas of interest that we as an industry are looking at with huge interest, and we were partner into the climate partnership and delivered our inputs here. And just today, the latest report came out from the Danish Energy Agency, and one of the comments were that that we are on track. It will be difficult for Denmark to reach a 70% target, but certainly with the use of CCS on the longer term, it might be possible for us to reach those targets. Another interesting news yesterday was, or was it this morning, some of the problems in Denmark, in Copenhagen in particular, with getting clean air. It's not enough to drive down emissions in Denmark, but we do need to make sure that we also drive down emissions in our neighboring countries. And that can be done by using gas in the energy transition. So to end this quick helicopter tour, then it's looking at Denmark in Europe in a global context. We need oil and gas for many years to come. We've seen that. That's a position of strength. Denmark is producing our own gas and our own oil. We need to make sure that we produce our own resources in a responsible way. Energy policies will increasingly be the same as security policy. This whole context is extremely important. We saw that back in 73, and increasingly so is that becoming a topic both in EU and in Europe. I think that it will be interesting to see the energy union in the EU, how that will be developing in the coming years, whether it will be taking a role or not. So far, the various interests of the various parties and thereby the various countries in the EU has indicated that it will be very difficult for EU to have a common position in this respect. So, and I think it's an important point that we the demand going for energy will be challenged, and thereby the world's democracy will also be challenged by the dependency in other countries on the supply of energy. So that is something that we really need to take into consideration. And then, of course, obviously, we need to have an increased focus on the climate. Let's not forget that. And that will require an increase in collaboration across all industries and across all nations. So that was my presentation.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this interesting presentation. I think it gives a very nice background, actually, for what I talked about, also for how states position themselves as they do on the pipes, especially the numbers you gave on your map on Europe and China being the least self-sufficient. A lot of it goes to show exactly why you might find some European countries very interested in seeing gas lines, new gas lines constructed. Now, one thing before we move on, I want to tell the audience that we have a Q&A function, and we will have a Q&A session after we've had all the three speakers speak. So please don't hold back. Just begin to write questions in the Q&A. Then, when we get to the Q&A session, I will read the questions aloud and try to direct them to the right panelist as best I can. Now, our second panelist here today is Izabela Surwillo, who is a postdoc here at DIIS, financed by a Carlsberg grant that Trine Villumsen Berling is heading, and Izabela will talk about the Polish angle to all of this. Izabela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mikkel. Good morning, everyone. So today I'll be talking about the Polish perspective on energy and geopolitics in the Baltic Sea region in relation to the gas pipelines, and to jump straight to one of the leading questions for our today's webinar, which is how does it happen that energy projects stop being just a matter of economics or day-to-day technicalities and become a concern also for the security agenda? For anyone who's obviously following the debate in the region and what's happening, when they know that gas politics is pretty much very much on top of the Poland's security agenda and has been for some years now. And what I would like to do today is I would like to put it in a wider perspective. Sorry, Mikkel, how do I change the there you go.
There, excellent. It looks fine.
Yes. So today I would like to put it in a wider political perspective, basically by tracing back a little bit how energy policy became securitized in Poland over the years, and how does it translate into the Polish view of the pipelines that are currently in the Baltic Sea, so Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2. And then I'll say a few words also about the Baltic Pipe, which is considered, as much as Nord Stream projects are considered quite problematic from the Polish perspective, the Baltic Pipe is seen as a solution, both in terms of diversification of gas supply, but also, as it was already mentioned, for its role in the economic transition, energy transition. So if you would like to trace how come that energy became more of a security issue in Poland from being just part of an economic agenda, then how it became politicized and then securitized, we have to go back a little bit to the 1990s, when after the collapse of the Soviet Union, countries in the region were of course left with the old energy infrastructure, but they had to renegotiate new contracts for gas supplies. And here, crucial for Poland was signing of the Yamal contract in 1996 with Gazprom for gas deliveries to Poland. The process of signing this contract was not very transparent, and it was criticized afterwards for its economic dimension, also because it considered, it included two quite non-favorable rules. One was take or pay, meaning basically that Poland had to purchase all the contracted gas yearly, and the other one that basically prohibited Poland from re-exporting that gas. So that locked Poland in this economic relation with Russia for many years to come, as the contract is only expiring in December 2022, so next year. And that led already to some politicization of the issue, because there were concerns raised about being so dependent on a gas monopolist. And that led to the issue of energy supply being put more highly on the political agenda, with the diversification plans of the subsequent governments looking for alternative supply routes from different geographical locations. However, this energy policy was quite inconsistent and not much happened over the next years, although they were considering different geographical directions also from Norway at the time, and the talks about LNG terminal were also on the table. Partially, those plans didn't work out that well because of all the contracted gas from Russia, the economic viability of new projects was not that great. However, although the issue was politicized, it was still not yet part of such a security agenda. Here is a quote from the state-controlled oil and gas company in Poland, which signed the contract with Gazprom from 1998, which basically talks about the fact that Russian gas is the cheapest, so there is no reason for concern about the security of supply from Russia at the time. This, however, changed in the coming years. So here we have changed, both domestic political change and changes when it comes to security developments in Poland's eastern neighborhood. In 2004, there is Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and since then, Poland actually became much more involved in the policy developments in the east. It was much more involved, also became stronger partner to Ukraine. In 2005, Law and Justice came to power in Poland, and in 2006, we have the Ukrainian gas crisis. And this crisis, of course, sparked the debate about energy security in many countries in Europe, and especially in countries of the region. In Poland, it basically put the energy at the top of security agenda, and basically that issue pretty much stayed there. Lech Kaczynski, former president, when he started his presidency, he put energy security as one of his top priorities, and he wanted to focus on a number of issues when it comes to gas politics, the development of LNG terminal, diversification of gas supplies, increased domestic gas production. And it's important to note that at the time, those decisions were made, and they were strategic decisions. So economic rationale was not the primary driver in a sense. Some news outlets from the time were reporting that, for example, the plans for LNG terminal in Gdynia port were actually treated as a foregone conclusion, whereas the economic and technical feasibility studies were still underway. Also at the time, energy security analysis and action projects became a responsibility of the National Security Bureau, which was directly responsible to the president. Special working group on energy security was established, and energy security was included in the national security strategy of the Polish Republic in November 2007. So it is in this context of this already securitized energy policy that later developments also in the eastern neighborhood, such as political developments, war in Georgia in 2008, and then Ukrainian-Russian conflict in 2014. This is all the context in which the pipeline politics are also viewed from in the region. And when we look at the Polish response to the Nord Stream 1 project, the media coverage was quite intense at the time. There were a lot of historical references made and work like rhetoric even, but basically the main logic was that the concern raised are always the same. It's about EU's increasing gas dependence on Russia. It's about the concerns about the energy being used as a foreign policy tool. And after the outbreak of the Ukrainian-Russian war, the concerns that are resurfacing recently, they also revolve around the EU's solidarity and also concern about economic and political security of Ukraine, not only in terms of losing the revenues coming from being a transit country, but also for Ukraine, if it stops to be a transit country, then it will be also more vulnerable politically. And as Mikkel mentioned, there is this argument about economic interdependence and how being more engaged with economic ties with Russia could increase, perhaps bring Russia closer to our democratic values and cooperation. This rationale is not that widespread in CEE. It's rather in the minority. Rather, the concerns raised question even how the additional revenue from gas exports could be used by Russia and be channeled into a further destabilizing security situation in the region. The rhetoric, it is very much about high security interest and national interest. This type of arguments, of course, they are not voiced only by Poland, but by a number of states in the region, in particular the Baltic states and Ukraine. And they kind of express sort of like this regional dynamic. However, as much as the Nord Stream projects are considered problematic, the Baltic Pipe is considered also in security terms, but is very much seen as a solution to Poland's struggle, both in terms of gas diversification and to Poland's energy transition. And the timing, so to speak, couldn't be better, because it is to be completed in autumn 2022, as it is scheduled now. And this is nearly at the same time as the Yamal contract with Gazprom is expiring in December the same year. So this is, as Polish Prime Minister mentioned in 2018, when this contract was signed, a milestone for the Polish security and energy independence. The Northern Gate, as it is called, meaning the direction of supply from the northern part of Europe, is considered to be the main source of gas supplies. It can become main source of gas supplies or main geographical direction from which gas will be imported after that date. And Mikkel also mentioned this is capacity. It's not the big capacity in like European terms, 10 billion cubic meters per year. However, for Poland, it is very significant. It is similar to what was imported from Russia. And together with LNG terminal, which is already built in Świnoujście, and which is to be extended according to current plans, Poland could actually have enough gas to meet domestic consumption for the moment, at least to the estimates. There are also some plans for building another LNG terminal in the Bay of Gdańsk. And this together also, it is, of course, from the Polish perspective, it's good, but it also has certain regional dimension, as there are talks now about Poland potentially becoming a gas hub for this part of Europe, with new interconnectors to be constructed also with some other remaining neighboring countries. And this also plays well into the regional initiatives, such as, for example, the Three Seas initiative that was established not long ago by Poland and Croatia, that includes a number of countries in the region, and that focuses on different projects in infrastructure, including highways, railway, but also gas infrastructure. So this is important. So gas is important in terms of diversification. And also it will allow Poland to finally switch away from the Russian sources. It's also important for the domestic energy transition. Poland, of course, is still heavily reliant on coal, but it has to go away from coal. This is problematic, and but however, there was a clear shift in the last years when it comes both to policy approach and the rhetoric. If we look at the basically statements of politicians, despite the agreement that was reached last autumn with the mining industry that coal mines will be slowly phasing out until 2049, this doesn't seem so feasible. Most likely this will happen much sooner. It will be much reduced already by 2030. And with coal being phased out, of course, there is a need for alternatives, and gas here will play an important role. Important role will be also played by some other resources, such as renewables, here especially offshore projects on the Baltic Sea, some of them also in cooperation with Denmark, photovoltaics and biofuels, as well as the nuclear power plant. When it comes to nuclear energy in Poland, there were a number of delays, and this project has been going on for many years. However, this year the decision is supposed to be made about the final location for the first power plant, and there are 6 blocks that are supposed to be built by 2043. Some skeptics and different analysts look at this forecast and say, well, that might not be feasible, that the first reactor might not be actually there in 2033, and the capacity from renewable energy may be also slightly lower. But if that's the case, then the more important the gas use will be. Nuclear energy is also presented in Poland as green energy, pretty much. And it is a key and important element of the energy portfolio. This is considered at the moment for the future. So if you look at the gas politics in the region and the 2 projects, what we can say in general about Poland, and it also applies to a number of other states in the region, Energy security is certainly closely linked with the security agenda. In fact, those projects in energy infrastructure are overlooked by top security agencies in the country. Also, the understanding of the concept of energy security in the CEE very often is not just about economic considerations. It is very much considered and used either interchangeably with the notion of energy sovereignty. If you look at the political statements of the politicians, but also documents and the rationale behind that, then it is very much about sovereignty as much as it is about the security of supply. And this implies well, in ideal case, that would imply that we can use domestic resources as much as possible, and only when we run out, then we look for alternatives. Since this is not an option given the EU climate policy, then the next best thing is to diversify as much as possible to maintain enough independence. So this is the rationale that applies to a number of countries in the region. And because there are like common interests and common concerns, when it comes to energy geopolitics in the CEE, there's also certain regional perspective that increases cooperation as much as possible. And it is also obviously closely tied to what is happening in terms of political situation and geopolitics and security agenda in the Eastern neighborhood. And since this situation is not really calming down, but rather escalating, then I think it is safe to say that this perspective on energy in the region will not change in the near future. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Izabela, for bringing in the Polish perspective. I think that's much needed to have in the debates, much more than we have, at least in Denmark. So now we move a bit closer to home. Now we shift to our third and final speaker of the day, and that's senior researcher here at DIIS, Trine Villumsen Berling, who is working on a project financed by Carlsberg, and who will talk about Baltic Pipe and Nord Stream 2, and say a bit more about what it means for Denmark and how it's talked about in general. Trine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mikkel. I will also try and share my screen here. See if I have a PowerPoint show somewhere. Should be here. I'm sorry about this. As Martin said before, we tried this out before we started, and apparently it's not really giving me the easiest time.
I couldn't find mine because I had so many windows open. So sometimes you have to scroll down and find it.
Okay, yes. But it seems to not really be here. I'll try again. This is not. No, this is the wrong one. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the Nord Stream 2 and the Baltic Pipe from a Danish position, as Mikkel just alluded to. I think this is the presentation coming here.
It looks good.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a story that's actually a lot different from the story that Izabela just told us. It's a Danish story about desecuritization, politicization, and perhaps technification, or perhaps just being caught in the middle of something that we weren't really a part of. I'm going to walk you through some of the highlights of the Nord Stream 2 debacle and how it intertwined actually in the Danish debate with the Baltic Pipe. And then I'll try and suggest a few ways to understand these issues in a more analytical perspective. So first off, like Martin told us before, Denmark's energy situation actually puts us in a very peculiar and special place. Denmark has consistently ranked as the top performers in what's the trilemma index that you can find online, because we've been self-sufficient in oil and gas since the mid-1990s. In 2020, also as Martin mentioned, we had a slight dip in production because the Tyra field, the big gas field, is closed due to maintenance work, but it's set to go back on track in June 2023, only with a few delays due to COVID. So bottom line, Denmark was never in the Baltic Pipe or the Nord Stream 2 debacle because of gas supply. It's basically because we got caught in the middle by geography. And this also means that these pipelines are purely political questions for Denmark. They're not about gas, to put it very bluntly. In this part, as Mikkel said, the Baltic Pipe goes through land and sea in Denmark. I will focus mainly on the sea part of the Baltic Pipe, because this is where Nord Stream 2 and the Baltic Pipe, so to speak, met in the middle of the Baltic Sea. And much of this debate is centered around the little island of Bornholm that most people in Denmark know from vacations in childhood, and that many people in the world came to know as the place of trouble for Nord Stream 2. Because the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was set to run through Danish territorial waters south of Bornholm, and thereby paralleling the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, already pumping gas into Europe. Actually, the route suggested by the Danish authorities for the Nord Stream 1 was a compromise back in 2009, because other routes were on the table, such as the more southern route and a northwestern route around Bornholm. But these other suggestions met with different obstacles, and the most important one that I will talk about here today is this pink area south of Bornholm, because this is the area that Poland had been disputing since the 1970s. In other words, Denmark had a border dispute south of the island of Bornholm. And for this reason, we could simply not allow construction on the first and preferred route suggested by the Nord Stream consortium back in the 2000s. We didn't have the jurisdiction. So in 2009, the solution became to pull in the pipeline further into the coastline of Bornholm, where we had sure jurisdiction, and it was also then into territorial waters and away from the economic exclusive zone. So going back and looking maybe in retrospect at what happened back then, we have to understand that in Denmark, the Nord Stream 1 pipeline raised very little debate in Denmark, and it ended up being decided upon in a very pragmatic, political way. Denmark got better relations with Russia. We were in dire need of a better relationship with Russia at the time, because we had been quite outspoken about what was going on in Chechnya. We had a world conference for the Chechen organization in Copenhagen. We were not popular. So the Nord Stream 1 pipeline gave us this pragmatic political option to gain better relations with Russia. They wanted the pipeline. We didn't need the gas, but we still made a deal with them to get, be able to get a little bit of gas through the pipeline. And then we could perhaps also even make some money for Danish companies that could then more easily move into Russia and sell their goods. But in 2017, fast forwarding to the Nord Stream 2 project, something had changed. And the route that had been suggested by the Danish authorities was no longer seen as a good idea. The issue had shifted from a political to a securitized issue. So where we heard Izabela talk about the issue of energy being actually a security top agenda item, in Denmark it shifted in the mid-2010s. And why did it do that? Well, I think for obvious reasons, something happened. What changed since 2009 when we gave the first approval for the Nord Stream pipeline? Again, to put it bluntly, Ukraine happened. This is a pamphlet of a Swedish household. It was distributed to all households in Sweden in 2018, and it expresses very much the new feeling in the Nordic countries. If crisis or war comes. So the Baltic Sea had gone from being a rather peaceful sea in the eyes of the Nordics to a really rather, if not threatening, then at least a very vulnerable situation and very risky situation. And so even though Nord Stream 1 had actually been negotiated in the shadow of the Georgia war, it had not been enough to lift the issue of Nord Stream from a political to a security issue. But Ukraine had that effect. After Ukraine, the Nordic countries no longer saw Russia as a benevolent partner with issues. They were becoming like us. All of these ideas from the 90s and the 2000s about Russia learning, that was all gone. Now Russia had become a potential threat, also in energy. We saw a great power using power politics against smaller countries, Ukraine, Lithuania, and we saw incidents in Danish airspace that also figured prominently in the media coverage at the time. So even though Denmark did not distribute pamphlets like the ones in this image, we still had a really, really different view on what was going on in our neighborhood. And when the first application from the Nord Stream 2 consortium landed in April of 2017, we felt that the soil had just trembled under our feet. And now a Russian pipeline was to be built on our territory. What could we do? Well, the other countries in the Baltic Sea region all approved of the doubling of capacity. I think they had no other choice. But in Denmark, we held our ground. Being the only country along the pipeline where the pipe was supposed to be led in territorial waters and not the economic exclusive zone, we moved. We had a special position again. We were energy independent, as I said before, but we also had our territory that we could protect. But at the time, we did not have a continental shelf legislation that allowed us to include foreign and security policy issues into the evaluation of underwater pipelines. That changed. We changed it so that foreign and security considerations could be taken into account. And on top of that, issues like this one moved from the Ministry of Energy to the Foreign Ministry. In 2018, this basically meant that this was on the desk of the Foreign Minister, and we didn't hear anything. All the while, Denmark had made a move that singularized them, as we call it. We've learned from Cold War history that being singularized as a small state is not a nice place to be. But Denmark stood alone in 2018 without any partners, without anyone to support the stand of the Danish Foreign Ministry in holding back the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It wasn't as if everybody else agreed on the pipeline. It was just that Denmark was the one with the legal and the approval issue on its desk, and everybody started calling Copenhagen asking what's going on. Denmark was singularized and we didn't like it, but still, that's what we were. Attempts to defer the decision to the EU were not really successful, and at least they were not moving fast enough. So, Denmark took a different route. When the second application from NS2 arrived in August 2018, they were sick and tired of waiting for the Danish Foreign Minister to make a decision on the first route through territorial waters. Well, then the Danish territory was no longer in play. Actually, the second route that they applied for would go through the economic exclusive zone northwest of Bornholm and would therefore not include the new continental shelf legislation. However, Denmark, without wanting to stay on the front line as a singularized country, deferred the decision to the technical energy agency. And a lot of pressure was put on the Danish Energy Agency in 2018 and 2019, where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was largely silent about the Nord Stream 2 issue. In the meantime, and without the public actually knowing much about it, negotiations with Poland took off. Because underneath the international debate about what Denmark was doing in the case of Nord Stream 2, Danish diplomats were actually working magic on the Baltic Pipe. Knowing full well that the issue of the Baltic Pipe was seen in direct relation with Nord Stream 2 and the Russian energy threat from the east when you talk to Poland, Danish diplomats agreed to negotiate about the border to Poland south of Bornholm. In that sense, Denmark actually used the Russian energy weapon because it served the Danish purposes in the negotiation process. The Danish-Polish border that was the result of the negotiations is marked in green on this map. It's in Polish. Because Poland actually ended up giving up 80% of its disputed area in these negotiations with Danish diplomats in late 2018. In Polish, the title reads, "A division of the gray zone in the Baltic Sea for the needs of the Baltic Pipe," courtesy of Izabela translation. And in Danish, actually, with a lot less flattering concept, this is called the rotten banana. So Denmark got most of the rotten banana in these negotiations, and the Danish Prime Minister at the time said, well, this opens up new interesting opportunities south of Bornholm. Again, the little island of Bornholm was in turmoil and on the international headlines. So even though the EU track finally started moving and the gas directive was altered in 2019 so that it would apply to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, it did not alter the Danish situation. We still needed to decide on a route. And after the new successful negotiations of the border to Poland, the Energy Agency asked the Nord Stream 2 to apply for yet another route in the newly gained territory, or EEC, south of Bornholm. The consortium complained they had never heard of a process of this kind, but still, they sent in a new application in April 2019. And it's actually a route that resembles very much the first route that was in play for Nord Stream 1 back in the 2000s. Still, we waited. We had 3 applications in play. But then, in June of that year, 2019, the Nord Stream 2 consortium withdrew the first application, thereby effectively meaning that the changed Danish continental shelf legislation no longer applied to the Nord Stream 2 project. They simply didn't ask to build in territorial waters, and our hands were tied. The technical track took over and the new southern route was approved by the Energy Agency in October 2019. The Danish role was effectively over, and as we know, the US took over and imposed sanctions on Nord Stream 2 in December of 2019. This is a map of the final route agreed to by the Danish Energy Agency in late 2019. So, key concluding points. As a conclusion, the process of these 2 pipelines shows that energy in Denmark, and gas specifically, does not come with a certain form of politics attached to it. In fact, in some cases, it will be a political issue, as we saw with Nord Stream 1 in the 2000s in Denmark. At other times, it will be a purely technical mode that goes into action when we talk about these energy issues. But more and more, as both Martin and Izabela have alluded to, energy is becoming security issues, also in Denmark. We still don't have really a strategy for it, but it's what we are dealing with today. Because of Danish self-sufficiency, the Baltic Pipe and Nord Stream 2 were primarily political issues, not gas issues for Denmark. And I think this is a very important point to keep in mind. Denmark was never in the middle of this because we needed the gas supplies. We were in the middle of this mainly because of geography and because of international legislation about the law of the sea, a border that had not been negotiated with Poland for 40 years, or maybe even close to 50 years. So that's where we ended up in gas pipeline geopolitics. Nord Stream 2 was certainly securitized in Denmark, and that was a real change. The Nord Stream 1 pipeline was not securitized. We did have our doubts, but then it was also a good option to have a better relationship with Russia. We were still, at the time of Nord Stream 1, thinking about Russia as becoming more like us. Not so with Nord Stream 2. And Baltic Pipe was largely a matter of technicalities for Denmark, very, very unlike the Polish position, but it offered a chance of settling an international border. And that's why it became really important in the Danish foreign ministry. And it was also a very successful negotiation. But again, we got caught in gas pipeline geopolitics for geography reasons and for border reasons. What we can learn, however, in Denmark, and maybe more broadly speaking, is that it's not nice to be singularized, not in energy, not in security issues. And Denmark was singularized by the way this issue was handled. We could perhaps, for the future, think of building a better strategy for energy issues in the Baltic Sea region, but also perhaps start building alliances of a more durable character also in the energy field. I think Mikkel mentioned in the beginning that actually energy and security do not align in what countries stand on what side. And I think we need to think more and more about this in the years to come. And then as my very final remark, and Mikkel also talked about this, for most, the gas pipeline is not what begged a political answer. It was something different. But going forward, gas pipelines and gas in itself and fossil fuels in itself will actually be what begs an answer. For the climate crisis is coming, and we have to somehow take a stand also in strategic terms on what we will do when the gas and the fossil phase is over, and how the geopolitical situation will actually look when we enter this new phase. And this is long ahead. It's maybe 2050. Yes, that's true. But it's never been a bad idea to plan ahead in strategic issues. And that's where I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you, Trine. Excellent to have the Danish case laid out as well. Now we will shift to the Q&A. And I think the way we're going to do it is that I'm going to be reading or paraphrasing the questions, and then I think I'm going to take a few questions at a time, and then we're going to do a round with the panelists again. I think that's the best way to cover as much ground with the questions as possible in the short time that we have left. We have 24 minutes, so we should we will all try to be effective about it. So without further ado, I'll go to the first question. And it's about the environment. In what way would you say, it's Christian Burger who writes, in what way would you say that environmental questions feature in the debate, both in terms of impact of pipelines on the maritime habitat, but also in terms of risks of accident and pollution? If these concerns do not feature at all, what would be your explanation for this, given that there is otherwise a lot of attention to conservation and safety of the Baltic Sea? That was question number one. So I hope, please, all panelists take notes. Then we go to question number two. How significant is Baltic Pipe for the transition from coal to gas? Would the same transition have happened without Baltic Pipe? What does Baltic Pipe mean for the transition to zero-emission renewable energy production? And then I think a final third question, and then you can just pick and choose when we go through, the second question was from Jakob Sørensen. And then we have third question, Matthias Hansen asks, Poland is already oversupplied with gas. Even the newly built LNG terminal is running at 40% capacity. At the same time, Poland has not ruled out continuing importing Russian gas as long as the price is competitive. Won't Baltic Pipe end up being in a bidding war with Russia being the winner? And doesn't that imply that the Baltic Pipe will not be used at all as a transition fuel, or at least not at full capacity? And what are the European motivations to build this pipeline? Okay, I'll just give a very brief comment on the last question. I think before handing it over to the panelists, I think that even if this turns out to be true in technical terms, I think it's important to note that there's a big difference between Poland choosing to import Russian gas because the price is right, and being dependent on Russian gas. In geopolitical terms, that's a world of difference. So in geopolitical terms, you could theoretically consider an option where even if a pipeline might not be on full capacity all the time, it may still serve its geopolitical purpose by giving flexibility. But now I'll hand it over to a round of questions. I think let's start in the order that we started out here. So Martin, if we start with you, you don't have to address all three, but just pick the questions that both best suit you to answer.
As I can see it, then they are very Baltic Pipe or Poland specific. I would like to address the environmental question. And certainly here in a Danish perspective, the care for environment is something that is extremely high on the agenda. We are very much aware in the Danish oil and gas industry that our license to operate is that we are taking due consideration to the environment. We have a very close collaboration with the authorities. We are doing water column studies, and we are doing what we can to make sure that we emit as little as possible. We are not there yet, so we are working closely on that. And so certainly, so that can be answered with a clear yes. Yes, it is something that is of high concern. It's something that we're working very, very closely on.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Martin. Then we'll just move on to Izabela.
Yes, it doesn't feature much when it comes to environmental aspects, not from what I've seen. I would attribute it mostly to the fact that in general, environmental matters are not that high on the agenda in Poland when it comes to discussing economic issues or like pipeline projects. So this is just the general statement. When it comes to environmental awareness in Poland, it is not as high as in some countries of Western Europe.
Okay, and do you have for the other two questions?
Right, we are doing that at the same time. So how significant is Baltic Pipe for the transition from coal to gas? Well, as significant as gas will be for the transition, it is considered now, and it is featuring in the energy strategy for 2040 as the bridge fuel. So and currently electricity from coal is mostly coming from coal, so it will be important, but it all depends on all the other puzzles in our energy mix. It is hard to make estimates because it all depends how well the energy efficiency measures will be implemented, how much can be produced from the renewable energy and offshore, will the nuclear power plant actually be constructed. So it all comes together into one picture. And then you can look at the numbers in the years to come. Would the same transition have happened without Baltic Pipe? I assume it would have to, because of the EU regulations. There would need to find out other ways to do that. However, as Mikkel already mentioned, addressing the third question, there is a big difference in being dependent on a monopolist, a gas monopolist, which was dictating the prices, and Poland was actually ending up paying very often more than Western countries for gas, and being able to choose. And yes, the contracting gas from Russia is not ruled out at the moment. It's a different dynamic when you have alternatives, so you can bargain for it as well. Was there somewhere else? I'm not familiar with this Friends of the Earth Europa report, whether Poland is oversupplied with gas. Not according to a number of data. I mean, there is a talk, if it will be oversupplied, that's why there is also talk about becoming energy hub in the region, if there is going to be surplus. But currently, if the shift will happen from east to west, so the estimates are that with the Baltic Pipe and the LNG terminal, Poland could import around 16 to 17 cubic meters of gas yearly. And on top of that, there's 4 billion, of course, 4 billion cubic meters yearly of home production. So there will be a little bit more, but again, how it will play out in the transition, it all depends on all the other parts of the puzzle and all the other energy sources that will be used, and to what extent it will be successful. And it all depends also, of course, on the coal sector and how quickly that will be withering away. Yes, I think that will be it for now.
Excellent. So
Sorry, just to what did Poland get out of the deal? Well, it got diversification of gas supplies basically, and it was looking for the diversification of gas supplies since the 1990s.
Excellent, thank you very much. And then we have Trine.
Thank you, and thank you for these questions. Interestingly, the environment, the first question, what role did it play in negotiations? It did play a rather key role in Nord Stream 2 negotiations, actually, because it was part of what we could take into account in the Nord Stream 1 round, because that's what we could do. Economic and environmental issues could be taken into account when we were judging whether a pipeline would be feasible in our territory or in our economic exclusive zone. So there has been a lot of reports being made about codfish and about where you can't trawl. And most of you will be aware that the Baltic Sea is actually not a very healthy sea. We have chemical munitions depots right to the northeast of Bornholm that you should also mind when you build on the seabed. If you start touching some of these chemical munitions, all hell will break loose in the sea. So this has been a very, very important factor in negotiating these pipelines. And as I said, in 2018, when we were just waiting to see what would happen, the Energy Agency was obviously also tasked with making all kinds of predictions and reports about what would happen should something go wrong during these pipeline projects. And that basically was also a bargaining chip for Denmark to just basically, spend more time on the processes, and, we have to get this right kind of arguments. So it played a role also politically, not just for the sake of the environment, but also politically to buy time. And this we've seen many times concerning the Nord Stream 2 process. With the Baltic Pipe, it's been different. Obviously, still the same rules apply. If you want to construct a big pipeline on the seabed, all kinds of environmental assessments need to go into the process. And every rule, as far as I can see, has been followed. On land, it's been different. And there's been a lot of public let's say, attention, mostly in the areas where the pipe will be dug down in the ground. And still, I think in Denmark, we know that environment matters a lot when we do these projects, but it's energy. I mean, you can't take the fossil out of the natural gas. It's still a natural, it's still a fossil fuel. So, and Denmark is well aware of that. In terms of the shift from coal to gas, that's not my expertise in Poland, but it's certainly been mentioned that it might not have the effect of making the shift from coal to gas entirely the way it has been depicted in the applications. Still, I think we should go with Martin's first talk and say how much less CO2 emission we will actually get if successful in shifting from coal to gas. And I think that's a rather, let's say, fast shift that we could benefit from in the short term. Then the third question, I heard the question also including what's the European motivation, and I think it was behind the Baltic Pipe. The Baltic Pipe has been named a project of common interest in the Union. Every year, or I don't remember the time span, but every 5 years, there's a list of projects, infrastructure projects that are deemed of special interest to the Union. And obviously the Energy Union being formed in 2015 with the explicit goal of diversification and going away from this huge dependence on Russian gas. I think it's up to 40% now of Russian gas that EU as a whole is importing. Baltic Pipe is part of that political process, which is also, in my view, a security agenda for the EU. Basically, diversification through pipes like the Baltic Pipe has been high on the EU agenda because of this political mandate to the Energy Union to basically slowly but surely shift away from this over-dependence or over-reliance on Russian gas.
Excellent. Thank you very much to all the panelists for that. We have quite a few questions coming in now, and realistically, I think we will only get to do one more round of answers from the panelists. So I'm going to just briefly flesh out a few questions, and then then the panelists don't have to all of them answer. We'll just see if we can get someone to answer on every question. That would be ideal. So we have one question here from Ondes Ruiz Rodriguez. What is the role of the 2019 gas directive that has played out, and how has it played out in the Nord Stream 2 issue? We have this one. What did Poland get out of the deal? I think we covered that already. I might add myself to that question. To Trine, what did the Polish think about the Danish move? Was there resentment? If you could go into that. Then we have from Clara Schade Poulsen. I was wondering whether there has been any research on the impact of the Energy Charter Treaty on the building of gas pipelines. Have countries taken into account the impact of committing to such energy infrastructure when there is a chance of being sued through the ECT by international companies? Is the Energy Charter Treaty a factor that has been considered by politicians in the negotiations surrounding the pipelines? And then final two questions. We have an anonymous attendee that asks if approval of Nord Stream 1 was seen as a way for Denmark to improve relations with Russia in 2009. Was this also considered before approval of Nord Stream 2? And then finally, what is the worst from an environmental perspective, Norwegian gas or Russian? So we have a good basket of questions here for the final round of answers for the panelists. I think we'll do the same order and go back to Martin. Martin, just pick and choose as you want.
Well, I think that I'm slightly over-asked here. It's a very Baltic Pipe. Also considering the time, I think I'll just, I'm not sure I can respond in a very intelligent way to these excellent questions. So I'll just pass it on to Trine or whoever would like to pick it up.
Okay, excellent. Then we have Izabela, and so Trine and Izabela, you have roughly about 4 minutes each.
Actually, at this point, I will also leave the floor to others. Yes.
So Trine, perhaps they were also very much directed of you, many of them.
Yeah.
So
I'm happy to try and at least talk about some of the issues. First off, the role of the 2019 gas directive on the Nord Stream 2. Obviously, we didn't talk about this much today, but the EU Parliament agreed on a new gas directive in 2019 that would effectively hinder a supplier of gas also being the owner of the distribution of the gas. I think that's the easiest way to put it. Basically saying if a pipeline enters the EU territory by one company, in this case Gazprom, then Gazprom would not be allowed to then also be in charge of the distribution of the gas. And there has been a lot of legal afterplay, let's say, in Germany specifically about this issue, with some of the courts at first saying no, this does not apply to the Nord Stream 2 because it was an ongoing project, and then finally deciding that yes, this will actually also be applicable to the Nord Stream 2. And then, you know, it's really a very legal question, but they're still figuring out the details as far as I know. As you know, the Nord Stream 2 has faced different problems since then that were of far greater had far greater impact because of the US sanctions in late 2019 that effectively meant that the ships that were laying the pipes left because they were threatened with sanctions by the US. And now with the Biden president coming in, and maybe the hopes were high that we would see a change on this issue. Unfortunately, as we've known all along, the Nord Stream project, both the 1 and the 2, has been what they call a bipartisan issue in the US, meaning that both Democrats and Republicans agree to disagree with the project, basically. So Biden has moved in now, and of course he speaks with a lighter tone of voice, but still it's with the same message that don't do this, Nord Stream 2 should be stopped. So in that connection, the gas directive did, you know, halt stuff from being smooth for the Nord Stream 2 consortium. The Germans didn't like it, but in the end they had to agree with it. But really what stopped the Nord Stream 2 in its steps was the US sanctions by late 2019, after Denmark played out its role. Mikkel's rephrasing of question number 5, what did the Polish think about the negotiation of the rotten banana or the gray zone? Well, I've only spoken to few Polish diplomats about this, and they seem, let's say, they have reluctantly accepted that their interests in the Baltic Pipe were far greater than their claim or their dispute of the border zone to Denmark. So I think we can fairly say Denmark got a really good deal. Had we not had the Baltic Pipe, we would still have a border dispute with Poland. That's my belief. But you know, you give some and you take some in diplomacy, and maybe next time Poland will say, well, do you remember back then in late summer 2018 when we were negotiating? Maybe you can give us something now in the next negotiation. I guess this is how it's going to play, because Denmark really got most out of those negotiations. Right, then there was a question about whether the Danish decision to approve of the Nord Stream 1 connection, and in light of trying to improve relations with Russia, whether that was also the case with Nord Stream 2. I think the very quick answer is a big no. I mean, Denmark really did not improve relations with Russia in this political process. We were rather, as I said, we were singularized, meaning we stood there alone in front of the big neighbor, and we were named. It was the Denmark in front of the big neighbor for a couple of years there. That doesn't make for good relations with a big neighbor. Obviously, Denmark all the time sought to follow international law, and I think that's a very important issue to understand, that we never stepped outside of the legal frame. We changed our continental shelf legislation, yes, and made it possible to move the issue from the energy ministry to the foreign ministry, still within the name of the game, the rules of the game. And also in the next stage, with the negotiation with Poland, we were all the time within what can be said to be what international law will allow us to do. We did play on the Russian energy threat when we negotiated with Poland, yes, but still it was an international negotiation that in the end formed a peaceful border. It was a peaceful border solution, which is actually not that common in the world to see those kinds of peaceful resolutions of border disputes. But with Russia, we basically, I think my colleague Flemming Splidsbol at one time said, well, we've been noted down in the black book in the Kremlin on this issue. So well, I'm sure it played a role, but I think there was a different relationship. We were far keener on keeping warm, and that was the relationship to the US. And that was really, really hard pressure on Denmark from the US throughout this whole period, informally, of course, but I think it's safe to say that the pressure was felt in both the foreign ministry, the energy ministry. We had visitors at the university back then, I remember, you know, soft diplomacy, not hard diplomacy, but it was the US relation we were taking care of there. Then the final question was Russian or Norwegian gas, which is worst? Of course, this is a rhetorical question, but you would say in most of the Eastern European countries that I've spoken to that Russian gas doesn't come cheap, not in terms of money, but it comes with a security political top-up of the cost. You never know. That's what they say. You never know. It's Russian gas. It's a strategic form of foreign policy to always keep your partners in the dark about your intentions. And I think that what we've seen also in energy is this hesitancy and this, you know, this feeling of unease that comes to these countries, because you never know. When will the gas flow be slowed down? Can it be cut off entirely? We didn't even mention it a lot. Now I speak too much. I can see that on Mikkel. But in Ukraine in 2006, Russia actually broadcasted from the operations room when they were shutting down the gas pipelines going through Ukraine, just to make sure that everybody got the message. We are shutting it down. This is not a technical glitch. So what's worse? Is it the unease coming with Russian gas, or is it, free flowing, lovely Norwegian gas coming from our partner to the north? For the climate, it doesn't make a difference, but politically, it does make a difference.
Thank you so much, Trine, and I think that made for a very fine closing statement. Thank you to the panelists for excellent presentations and for answers. Thank you to the attendees for asking great questions and for following us here for these discussions. We will be back here at DIIS with more events on both Baltic Sea region security and on gas politics and on environmental issues as well. So stay tuned. Take a look at www.diis.dk and keep tuned on our events coming up. But for now, thank you so much and have a lovely day.